We're going to go over some basic Azure concepts to start with, just to make sure you're comfortable with them. And then we're going to get into the various data storage options and the different kinds of events that happen within those storage platforms. So to start with, your Azure Active Directory account, which is works from your on-prem, but it can also work from your Azure account. So it's a little bit different. Works for your entire Azure platform. So all the different things that are Azure are up there, and you want to get it right from the start. Otherwise, it can give you a little bit of pain points, but otherwise you can use role-based security to lock down various assets and really just to help secure your all your different Azure assets at a different level. And that breaks down into a subscription level. And a subscription can be thought of as a physical grouping of assets. So you can't easily go from one subscription to another subscription. And then that breaks down a little further into resource groups. Resource groups are more of a logical grouping of your different assets. In fact, the POC that we're going to be going over, well, not quite POC, but I actually created everything in one group, one resource group, so it'd be very quick to tear down those assets when we're done. Pricing tiers are something you'll also see now. Microsoft used to call these things service levels. And when you think about it, yeah, you want better service, you're going to pay more. So, and that's true for all of us. So one of the things when you're going up to Azure, you really need to watch what the cost is. So it's real easy to get caught up with it, and then all of a sudden you can get a little bit of sticker shock afterwards. But there also are ways of mitigating those costs. So to start with, what I did is a couple months ago, so like I said, all these different storage types and all these different events, that they're changing all the time. So I wanted a way to come up with just ways I could test this. So I could get some practical experience doing this, so I'd know what to recommend, the shortcomings and the benefits of different ones. So I took a personal project of mine. I collect bootleg albums, live recordings, and as you can tell, over the years, albums, tapes, to, well, CDs, DVDs. I've got probably more than most people have, songs in their collections. So I've got a boatload of it. A boatload. This is Led Zeppelin from May of '71 till May of '73. And that's only the ones I have in jewel cases. I've got tons more. Tons more. So I had all this from back in my trading days, because before you had things like BitTorrent and things like that, and Mega.co, you trade with physical human beings who also had copies of it. So I had all that inside a spreadsheet. And it also had things like what my opinion of various shows were and things like that. So I'm like, you know what? Let me take this and let me throw this up into the various data assets that we have. So I created a little C# program. And that C# program is going to load things up into the Azure Service Bus. So I think I have it. I can show it to you real quick. And don't judge me on my C#, or I'll judge you on your SQL. But oh, hey, wait, it's not displaying. Okay. Hey. All right, we'll give it one more shot. Nope, that's still not working. Yeah, that's the difference about doing this at home. Okay, well, I guess I can't show you the code, but well, we need this for some other things. I do need to get this rectified. Let's see if I pull down the C#, if I pull down my presentation. There we go. So really, all I'm doing here is creating some C#, creating a little user property. I'm creating a message, and then I'm writing it out to our message bus. And I know Shung can see it now because he's got 20/20 vision. But this is just the very end. I've created a JSON document, and now it's throwing it up on the bus. And within Service Bus, this is actually a tool called Service Bus Explorer, which I highly recommend picking up. It's actually up on GitHub, but it gives you a really quick way to look into your different topics, your different Service Bus instances. And I thought I was really, really lucky. I was like, wow, I caught 999 of them on the bus. I was like, what are the chances of catching that number? Well, a little more investigating and I found out why. Because as you might imagine, this is not something that I wanted to put on the most expensive hardware. But I looked in, I was able to check out a couple of the messages on the bus. That's what you see here, kind of how that all's working. But what I also found interesting was this one. So here's my topic and the subscription on the topic. And I was like, what happened? My max delivery count was exceeded. So this message actually ended up in the dead letter queue from the Azure Service Bus. And I had a limitation of 1,000 messages on my bus. And I forget what it is, 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So I exceeded the limitations of that. So I kind of skipped over exactly what the Azure Service Bus is. If you're unfamiliar with the Azure Service Bus, it is an enterprise integration message broker. So very concurrent, guarantees everything comes out in the way it goes in. So FIFO, first in, first out. It's used for asynchronous communication and was really used to decouple your applications. So if your data warehouse goes down, you don't want to have your order intake go down. So we write these messages up onto the bus, and then other apps, we use a pub sub, so we publish them to the bus, and then various applications subscribe to it. So pub sub, and we're off. So questions on Service Bus. So the Service Bus is the first part. So everything was taken out of my Excel spreadsheet, written onto the Service Bus, and now it's waiting for things to happen. Okay, let me go through all of this, and then we'll actually dive deep back into the details a little more. So everything's in the Excel spreadsheet. C# program writes it onto the bus. Then I have an Azure function which looks at that bus and reads the messages off the bus. That Azure function is going to write the message into a Cosmos database. Cosmos database has a claim feed. So any inserts, any deletes, Cosmos DBs, you don't do updates. Any inserts or deletes will appear in this change feed. You can react to that change feed. And I react to it by using an Azure Data Factory. So that Azure Data Factory reads those changes as it comes through, writes it down, it creates a JSON document down in Blob storage. In the Blob storage, I created a web crawler. That web crawler looks for changes in any of those Azure documents, Blob storage, and writes up into Azure Search. By the way, this is definitely not the way that you would want to design your data flow. Going back to my original premise, this is just something I did so I could test out the different capabilities. But all of these things are made possible by the Azure Event Grid. And hopefully it showed up there, yes. So, the Azure Event Grid is actually, well, handles all the eventing within your Azure subscription. So you do need one event hub within each subscription. Questions? Yes?
Cosmos database, is that different than just a SQL Server database?
Yes, we'll talk about it momentarily, but the Cosmos DB is more of a document database. So it's schemaless. So we're about to hop into all of those now. So hadn't meant to jump like that, but oh well. Talking in front of people, that'll do it every time. So we talked about the Azure Service Bus, and the next thing to talk about is the Azure function. And let's see how well our timing is going on here. And by that, I mean, let's see how much our internet here is working. Is that the right one? Okay. I was afraid of this after yesterday, seeing how slow everything was. Can we get? Okay. Well, here is how we're going to set up our trigger on the Azure Service Bus. So our Azure function that we're creating is going to need something to trigger it off. You could trigger it off either by time base or by an event. In this case, what it's doing is it's looking for an event on the service bus topic. It's subscribing to write to Cosmos. It's going to create a message called bootleg message and read it from a topic name, bootleg. And of course, I picked the wrong one. And I know that. Come on, Elvis. So this is the actual Azure function itself. If we get it. Here we go. So the wireless here is a little bit slow. We're bringing in our topic message, and then what we're doing is we're actually creating a JSON document that we're going to store up in Cosmos DB. And I did want to show one other example of a type of Azure function. I guess Drew can get all the credit for it since Sumit's not here. But this is an example of a durable function. And a durable function simply means that it's a function that can be used by multiple Azure functions. So in this case, we have a simple XML to JSON converter. And we could reuse that in several other places so that we can, to read our topics, to convert our messages. And then here is an Azure function. Again, this isn't related to the bootleg. This is actually some of our code, so you're not going to get a copy of this. But this is showing how we write it out on write that message out onto Azure Service Bus topic. Okay, so the Azure function is going to write it into Cosmos database. And Cosmos database, as this gentleman was asking before, is a document store. And where's our Cosmos database? And our Cosmos database shows a couple of different containers. And the containers are areas where you can write different things. So I created one for bootleg videos, one for rarities, one for live beats, and the default that's created initially is items. Now we can write from that into our various, into our Cosmos DB. Now, Cosmos DB is, like I said, it's a document store. It's schema-less. Microsoft has been throwing a lot of money at it. It was formerly called Document DB, and it has 5 different consistency models. And those models range from fully ACID to, eventually I'll get everything sort of consistent. So if you ever found on Amazon one of those offers that was too good to be true, so you bought it, and then an hour or two later, you get the email saying, oh, sorry, there was only a limited number of those, and you weren't lucky enough to get one. That's eventual consistency. But like I said, it's also multi-homed, meaning if you're one of your local instances of your Cosmos DB, because like all Azure assets, there's multiple copies of this. And different people can hit different ones. And if you're going on and you're trying to hit one, and it realizes that it's in bad shape, or the service is starting to degrade, it actually knows, hey, I could go over to this near one. So if you're in US East, you might be hitting Atlanta all the time. But then if Atlanta starts to degrade a little, it may shoot you up to Washington, D.C. or Orono, Maine, or wherever Microsoft has some of their services. And Document DB is probably is really only the tip of the iceberg. In big data terms, it is a document data store, key value data store, column family data store, and even a graph database. I'm still trying to wrap around everything a graph does. There was a great conversation earlier today, so I got a little bit more information on that. So I want to go try that out and see how well Azure fits into this space.
Extremely high performance system. Extremely high performance.
Yes, so the Cosmos database, Microsoft guarantees 99% of your reads will occur in less than 10 milliseconds. And you're right, 99% of your writes will occur in less than 15 milliseconds. So it is extremely performant. I mentioned the multi-homing. It can also be geo-fenced. So if you're North Korea and you say, hey, no one's allowed to look at this, and my people aren't allowed to look anywhere else, this Cosmos DB, I don't know how I feel about this from a political standpoint, but Cosmos DB is one of the tools that you can also use. And there's instances all over the globe. So if you have a global application, you can actually have ones in the time zone nearest to your customers. And I just want to make sure I mentioned the change feed. And let's look real quick at some of the data in here. Well. I mentioned earlier that some things are in preview, and I'm telling you, yesterday when I was preparing, or the day before, Data Explorer was still listed in preview mode. So, and you get familiar with this, and all you people using Azure already know this. These things come out constantly from Microsoft, all these little enhancements say, oh, hey, check this out, see if you like it. There's actually a SQL query preview to kind of make it like a query engine. And it was in preview, then all of a sudden, gone. I'm like, oh man. 6 months later, all of a sudden it was back up again in preview mode. And it remains to this day in preview mode. And that was about, that was close to a year ago that it came back again in preview mode. But this Data Explorer allows us to actually drill into our document database and see things. And there is a Data Explorer that you can also download. So there's a Data Explorer app, but it's nice to have it up in the portal as well. You can see here the different containers. And these are actually different documents contained within a database. If you noticed, it's not alphabetical in any way. And this, again, is by design. The key on it is a GUID. But if you notice, it's not even in GUID sequence. So it's just random sequence. Like I said, you can actually dig into the individual documents. Here's all of my information. Here's all the information that at Cosmos DB needs to understand this row of data. That help clarify a little bit?
Is this reference to the actual like the blob, I guess, in some other place?
It's actually behind the scenes. So this is up in the Cosmos DB itself. So yeah, it's an actual database. And Microsoft, in true eat your own dog food form, the Azure portal, its backbone is a Cosmos DB. And Sarju here was reading the other day from one of the women who helped create the project, create Cosmos DB. They originally created this to handle Teams and Messenger. So that was, and they needed everything concurrent, locally, and grouped together. So that's where all Cosmos database came from. So from Cosmos DB, we have a change feed, which goes into an Azure Data Factory. And I'm just gonna, since it's reacting as sluggishly as it is, I'm just gonna throw up a graphic of the Azure Data Factory. Now, Azure Data Factory literally is used to move data from one place to another. That can be on-prem to the cloud. It can be within the cloud. There are some transform capabilities. So you can do like an ETL or LET or however you want to do your transforms. However, it costs significantly more to do it. So the regular Azure Data Factory, if you add on the SSIS-like transforms, almost doubles the cost of it. So if you need to do it, you can. But if you don't need it, you may just want to hold off on it or handle it after the Data Factory has moved the data. Because what you can do is you can actually move it and then call a stored procedure at the very end to handle all your transforms, depending upon what it is. So it's completely JSON based. Version 2 is the current version. Though I was speaking to someone from Microsoft back in May, and she was telling me version 3 is supposed to be a major upgrade and is supposed to be released soon. I don't know what soon is any more than you know what soon is. But I will tell you, you do want to use version 2 as opposed to version 1. Version 1 was very code-centric, and you were essentially creating JSON documents to do the data movement. This is a much easier way to handle that. One of the things, they changed the name. Your source and destination are no longer source and destination. They're called link services here. So you can have link services to Blob, link service to your Azure Key Vault. I'm not going to really get into Azure Key Vault today, but that's actually one of the ways you really want to secure a lot of your access. Azure Search, Cosmos Database, and look at this, even Oracle. So you could connect to really anything, anywhere. Questions? And this really just, I put this one in here really just to show your event sources. So the event grid is going to respond to something. That something can be either event or a time schedule. So you can have something that runs same time every day, every 5 minutes, as well as being able to respond to events that occur. Yes?
What do you end up having comparative cost-wise between the Azure Service Bus and the Azure Network?
The Azure Data Factory, so the cost between the Service Bus and the cost of the Azure Data Factory, we actually found them cheaper than traditional, like SSIS. Well, for the Azure Data Factory, we found it cheaper than our VM, which was running the SSIS. So we did a bunch of SSIS when we only had Azure Data Factory version 1. Now we're in the process of upgrading those all to Azure Data Factory. And unfortunately, there's no tool yet to say, hey, convert this to Azure Data Factory. So, but we found the Azure Data Factory significantly less costly. One of the nice things too about the Azure Data Factory, the way it works, is if you're looping through an object, and say you're loading a data warehouse, and you've got 10 different tables, staging tables that you're loading. So you put them in a for next loop. And normally, like with SSIS, you know it's going to go one at a time and complete them all. But within Azure Data Factory, it'll actually spin up X number, X is configurable by you, and it can run them all concurrently. So you could get a lot quicker throughput out of things like Azure Data Factory. Yes, so like I said, we have some stuff in SSIS, but we're moving it all to Azure Data Factory. And as for the Service Bus can get pricey. But again, a lot of it has to do with how much you need to move around. So again, like everything else Azure, you can start at the basic level, and you might be able to handle 1,000 messages every 5 minutes. You can move up to the standard level, and there's different flavors of standard, or the premium level, and there's different flavors of premium. And as your throughput increases, so does your cost. So there's no one answer. It's really something that you can test to see for yourself, because a lot of it has to do with how much latency can you handle. So you're welcome. So from Azure Data Factory, we're going to be moving things down onto the Blob. And let's see if we can get a little more performance out of our storage. So storage account. Storage is another funky animal. But the beauty of it and the beauty of the nuances can really help. So one of the things you can see here, again, performance, yeah, read price. So your standard performance, but if you need more, you can pay for more. Secure transfer, do you need SFTP to get data in and out? Oh yeah. Access tier, here's another one, cool or hot. And hot means when you want it, it's there. That combined with your performance triggers everything else. But say you need to just archive stuff. you need to let some data hang out, and you might need it for a lawsuit, or you might need to look for some historical information in the future. You might be in an industry that requires you to keep 7 years of data. You can actually throw this up into Azure Blob storage, put it into cool storage, and it literally costs dollars per gigabyte and terabyte. It is dirt cheap. The funny thing about that is I was wondering why. I'm like, how the heck do they do this? Well, and they guarantee you'll get the file eventually. I forget the exact, if it's a couple hours. I'm sure it was within a day that you'll actually get your file. So, but if you're preparing for a lawsuit or something, a day is fine. I found out that they actually have magnetic tapes in the Azure data centers. So here you have this sparkly new clean suit environment with tape libraries. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Nope, that humble little tape drive from what IBM created back in the 50s and the 60s. Cheap storage. And it stays. It's like, I thought it was funny. You won't find CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, anything else, except maybe the technicians in the break room. But sure enough, you can find these little old magnetic tape drives in your Azure store. It's like, wow, how about that?
This protection from EMPs?
I don't know if it's quite that sophisticated, but a lot of those data centers are pretty bomb-proof, and trying to get in one, boy, you'd think you were trying to get into Fort Knox. A couple other things on the storage. You could use Azure Active Directory, and a lot of these things you could use any kind of, and it varies. But I know for sure with the Azure storage, you can go by your Azure Active Directory, you can go by Google, you can go by Facebook. As long any kind of authentication, you can bring that in. And the one thing you do want to use, and I have it turned off just for this demo, but it's Data Lake Storage Gen 2, hierarchical namespace. What's that mean? Well, if you use Data Lake Storage Gen 1, you can kind of fudge a folder hierarchy by putting slashes in your file name. However, everything was still a file by file basis. With the Azure Data Lake Gen 2, it has a true hierarchical folder structure. So you can actually perform any kind of archiving, any kind of access-based security, and it can actually be at the folder level. So that is actually a big enhancement. I didn't see much other difference between Data Lake Gen 1 and Gen 2, but that was a huge upgrade for. And okay, this one is still in preview. So the Storage Explorer is a way of, again, looking at your blob storage. So we're looking at our different documents, when it's in there, data types, size. So there's also a Storage Explorer locally to allow you a quick way to move data up and down between Azure and your local. Questions? Yes?
What does it mean that the access tier is inferred?
Oh, if you remember, the access tier inferred when we looked in the configuration for the blob storage, one of the options was hot inferred. Otherwise, you could have set it to cool.
Okay, that's where it's coming from.
Yes, that's where it comes from. So now we have all my bootleg records up in Azure Blob storage. Now we have a crawler. And what that crawler does is it goes through looking for changes in this folder structure, and loads them up into Azure Search. Add Azure Search, search service. Azure Search is Microsoft's take on Elasticsearch. I've had an argument yesterday with someone who's like, oh, it's a watered down version. It's like, watered down? It's like, where do you get that from? About the only thing I did note, the only difference, or the only major difference I note between the two of them is with Azure Search, you have to define all your index columns first. Because it's schemaless. But with Elasticsearch, when you load up your first document, it figures it out. And the reason I like Microsoft's better is because with the Elasticsearch, if you have a text column, but it comes in that first time as a date or an integer, it's going to say, hey, whatever that first one is, that's what I'm going to use. And they're a pain in the butt to change, and so I recommend against it. Well, as you can tell, I've pretty much drank the Azure Kool-Aid, so I'm good to go there. But we loaded this up. We were doing a proof of concept for this on the dev team, and we actually loaded up 26 million records into Azure Search. And we were doing all kinds of complex queries against the data, this field and this field and this one, and partial name searches. We didn't have a single return set come back in less than a second, in over a second. I think the highest we saw was 0.8 seconds to get it back. And I mean, you try that on, we actually have an issue on our Azure SQL database. We have one of them that we're searching on. And if you use just the search on last name of Smith, well, guess what? That's not selectable enough for your SQL database index. And we get timeouts. We've got 30 million rows in that table, and it's timing out because it thinks it needs to do a column scan. Table scan. So Azure Search, that same thing comes back lightning fast. Again, it is HIPAA compliant. I think we were asking about that earlier. It's a complete REST API, accepts regexes. One of the neat things that just came out last year is synonyms and relevance scorings. You still need to set up the synonyms. So if John and Jonathan and different spellings of both are in there, you need to set that up, but it'll hit on those. Sorry, did you have a question or in the back? No? Okay, just me. Has autocomplete, so you get the full Bing Google experience where you start typing in and it'll start giving you your information. And what was the last one I had? One of the other things that came out again about a year ago is Geospatial Search. So you can load up your lat longs and be able to figure out things near me, and it'll be able to respond to those type of queries. So now, if it'll come up, I'll show you the index. So here's where you would actually define the fields in your index. So you could define, I just did this kind of quickly and I know a little better now, but retrievable, if you want the data to come back in your query. Filterable, got where clause. Sortable, that's another big one. Otherwise it comes back by relevance scoring. Facetable means it can actually aggregate for you, and whether it's one of the fields that you can search upon. And one of the nice things, let me show you the nice thing. He can actually come in here to your index and Search Explorer. let's say we want to find band. I always want to do the equal sign. Oh, Aerosmith. Search. And sure enough, we get some Aerosmith concerts that I have a copy of. We could go from here, and you can see here relevance. It's like, what? Well, yeah, like I said, some of my notes about the performance, yes. So yeah, if you ever want to get me going, just start asking, think hiking will do it. Ask me about bootleg albums and recordings. Yeah, this one, someone threw a bottle up on stage, I think it hit Joey Kramer, the Aerosmith drummer, and Steven Tyler saw who did it, pulled the person up on stage, said, come on up here, you sing. Really, well, real funny if you like that kind of thing. I personally do. But you can even do things to search across everything. So one of my favorite songs from Led Zeppelin is When the Levee Breaks. So this actually searches out, and it comes out with found levee here, found levee in the comments, and we have a really high search score. But one of the things I was kind of surprised by, and unfortunately Led Zeppelin never played it that often during their touring career, but their bass player, John Paul Jones, played it later on in his 1999 tour. Like I said, get me started, 2 or 3 beers you put in me, I'll tell you anything. But I was like, how come it didn't happen? So I was like, how come John Paul Jones didn't come out there? So I type in John Paul Jones. And if you notice, I'm not saying which field to look at. And just John Paul Jones and levee. And I look here, and I'm still not seeing Led Zeppelin again. I'm not seeing any John Paul Jones. And I search through all of this. I'm like, what's going on? I'm still not finding it. Well, if you look here, I quoted it. I'm like, let me see. I took the name off. I took the quotes off the name. So you got to find out the little nuances in the search indexes. And look at that. I removed the quote, and all of a sudden I get Jones, comma John Paul. I'm like, database guy wants everything sorted properly, proper name sequence. That's why I couldn't find John Paul Jones. I look in here, and it's actually pretty funny because I'm like, I scroll down, and the first bunch are John Paul Jones. And then all of a sudden I find one from Heart. I'm like, Heart? What the heck are they doing in here? But sure enough, at this concert, they actually performed When the Levee Breaks. So it was smart enough to find that within the notes field within the search context. And you saw how quick it came back. And granted, there's only 1,000 plus recordings in here, but yeah, so it was smart enough to find it. And if we go a little further, with lower match scores, we find some Led Zeppelin, but then we even find Elton John. It's like, what the heck is Elton John doing in here? But again, John Paul Jones, levee, doesn't have a very high relevance score, but it has enough to say, hey, this is in there. And questions?
How do you charge for search?
Search is one of the ones, again, it depends upon how many indexes you have. Each Azure Search Azure Search can have multiple indexes. You can also partition them, and again, you can ramp up the cost. So at each service, or several of the service levels, it expands to different copies. I think I'm using Basic, and on the Basic it has 3 copies of the index. But if you go up to Standard, it has, I forget what the first level of Standard is, but it's like 5 or 7 copies of your search index.
Do we have any visualization tools on top of search?
The search would be just what you grab, because typically you're going to use search within your application. You could use this portal, and there's a couple other quick tools that you can utilize to practice like your regex and a bunch of this kind of stuff. I was just playing around and said, oh, how's this working? I'm like, hey, how come this is missing? But there are different things, but really get in there and play. It's easy enough to tear down. You can even get to the point where you use PowerShell to turn these off at night and turn it back on in the morning. So there's a bunch of different things you could do to contain cost. And if you have an MSDN subscription, you already get a bunch of information, or get a credit with your MSDN subscription. The same issue?
Yeah.
Oh.
Kibana is like ELT style.
Oh.
How Kibana provides the visualization that sits on top of the
So,
do we have a tool that the Kibana version?
nothing that I'm familiar with at this time. No, we've done a little bit internally, and that's really where I get most of it. And again, playing within this UI, within the portal UI.
Maybe Power BI.
Power BI would be an interesting one, because Power BI, you really want to connect your Power BI to an Azure Search. You might want to create your Power BI. You might want to create from your different Azure SQL databases or your data warehouse. But search, I don't think that would be. It would probably be a little bit of overkill for it, because usually with the report, you're not quite so worried. But you might want to hook it up on a report to do some quick lookups. But I think that's a little more complex than your average Power BI user. But that could be something that could be investigated. Good questions. Any other questions? How are we doing on time? 10 minutes. All right, so what did we miss? Are there any other storage options in Azure? We missed a really big one, didn't we? The Azure SQL database. I didn't even bother. Again, this is just something that I did for fun and for learning. But yeah, Azure SQL database is something else that we want. And like I said, we've been using it for about 3 years. If I had to go back to on-prem SQL servers, I would be kicking and screaming and looking for another job. There is so much wonderful stuff in the Azure SQL database world that I don't want to go back. You can't make me. There are the backups. I don't know if any of you have seen some of my earlier talks, but the backups. The first time I'm like, okay, well, how do I restore if we deploy something bad? Where's my backup? How do I get it back? My Microsoft rep says you don't need to know where it is. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure if something happens, things go south, my boss is going to be looking at me to restore that database. He's like, yeah, but you don't need to know where it is. I'm like, he's like, trust me, I'll show you. I'm like, trust but verify. And to go back to your SQL backups, all you need to do is click on Restore, specify a date and a time and a second, and if it's on a premium SKU, millisecond, and say Restore my database. Done. It creates a copy of the database as it existed in that point of time. Wow. Yes?
So it'll do that by default without you configuring or telling it to keep backups?
It keeps the backups for you. And it used to be, they just changed it, Microsoft just changed it about a month ago. It used to be, you can go back to any millisecond for the past 35 days. Now you can only go back 7 days. Unless you want to pay for it. But there's some brilliant things on here. Managed instance is another thing. That's not really the Azure SQL Database PaaS solution, but the reason I bring it up, you can actually use managed instance, and it can restore back to that point in time. That one I haven't had the pleasure of experimenting with, but I was like, that's pretty powerful. One of the other things they did for your on-prem databases, you can actually back up your on-prem database up into Azure. And I know there's a way of doing it, and I think it's the same way, where you can specify, give me this backup as of this date and time. Again, I haven't played with that one either, but after the first one, yeah, I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm like, this thing is great. We've had a couple times when we had to restore, and sure enough, it works exactly as advertised. Couldn't believe it. Kenny?
You mentioned that you're running SSIS on a VM.
Correct.
If you have Azure databases and you're running SSIS on a VM, what's the licensing model like on that? Do you actually have to pay for another license?
Running SSIS on the VM, you would have to have in a production environment, you would need to have your SQL Server license.
Okay.
Correct.
If you were instead running, let's say, Enterprise Edition on a VM also in Azure,
Correct.
and you're paying for your own license,
Correct.
do you still have to have a new license for that SSIS instance?
And that goes within your SQL Server packaging. Your SQL Server license would include SSIS.
Okay. Do they plan on offering Azure Data Factory on-prem?
Azure Data Factory on-prem, I have not heard of that, but we're currently using Azure Data Factory in the cloud, pulling data from on-prem.
Okay. And then finally, is there a way to export your the tasks within a Data Factory pipeline?
To export the tasks within a Data Factory pipeline?
Yeah,
Well,
can you generate code? So like AWS has a similar product called Glue, which is nowhere near as good. But you can export to Python, I think one other language. Is there a way to export the pipelines to any sort of code or anything like that, or XML or JSON?
well, I was going to, yes.
Okay.
The answer to that is yes, because it is, behind the scenes, all the Azure Data Factory is a bunch of JSON objects. Much similar, SSIS behind it is all .NET code. But within the JSON document, you can actually pull that information down. We have it installed within a continuous deployment pipeline. So once that's checked in, we deploy that on up that way. One of the other nice things with the pipeline, with the various data sets, they're all JSON based too behind the scenes. So if you have a different table to swap out, all you need to do is swap out that JSON, and you can reuse that entire pipeline. You're just changing the configuration of the link service, and it automatically picks all that up for you.
So I have some French questions here also. So if I have a bunch
Oui.
if I have some SSIS
That's about the end of my French, so.
if I have some SSIS packages that I want to migrate to Data Factory,
As your Data Factory?
you're saying there's not a tool to...
There is currently no tool.
Okay. Is there a way that...
Where's Brian Knight? I mean, it's pragmatic. Oh, I guess it's Century One now, right? They have that angle of it.
I guess what I was looking for, is there a way to go backwards? Like I'm running on Data Factory, I now want to export SSIS packages.
Boy, I couldn't say for certain, but I'd be surprised if there was.
Yeah, same here.
Because truly what you would be talking about would be changing that JSON document to the DTSX, that XML format. Could it potentially be done?
Might be in preview someday.
I would imagine that's one of the ones Microsoft says, hey, SentryOne, you handle this, or Redgate, take care of this. But yeah, most of these, most of the data, I can't think of an exception of it right now, are of the different data storage models. All of them behind the scenes are JSON based. So we have them stored. They are code, not just part of its infrastructure as code, but they are all code themselves. So we deploy that on up through our CD pipeline. So we create it in our sandbox or dev environment, and when that gets checked in, that's how we deploy up from there. Why, thank you. Any other questions? We also didn't hit on Azure SQL Data Warehouse, but PDW in the Parallel Data Warehouse in the cloud. Again, a lot of the same issues you'd run into locally. We also didn't talk about logic apps, and logic apps are a great way of integrating different pieces of the system together. I actually have a logic app that every morning checks my morning commute. It sends me an email if it's going to be longer than my average commute time. So, and it does that every 15 minutes between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. Again, real cheap executions. Keep them small. And I think I skipped over that with the Azure functions. You want to keep your Azure function very small. These are meant to be quick pieces of code. You don't want to build your entire application into an Azure function. Any other questions? I am around for all day today and tomorrow too. So feel free to hit me up, or I've got some cards up here. And thank you.